How are you? Is the economy collapsing? That's what we're going to discuss today. And this question comes to us by way of TikTok, where the hashtag economy collapsing has gone mega over the last few months. And here's a story that kind of sums it up. The viral $16 McDonald's meal that may explain voter anger at Biden. So, is the economy collapsing? Well, listen, I've been writing about this for a very long time. Let me put on my bona fide economist, top 50 thinkers in the world hat, and kind of get to the bottom of this with you. The answer to this question is yes, the economy is collapsing. Okay, and we're going to go through three very specific ways in which it's collapsing. We're going to discuss how they came to be, and we're going to discuss why there's this disconnect, right? Why is it that pundits and the establishment and, columnists and whatnot don't get this fact? Why do they try to actively deny it? Well, there's a reason for that too, which is about averages and aggregation and all this kind of stuff. So let's get into it, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you three ways in which the economy, it is collapsing. So the first one, the middle class used to be the thing that the American dream was the most renowned for, right? The vaunted American middle class. Over the time, it's become a minority. All right, so this started happening maybe around a decade ago. Okay, and it's a trend that is by now very well established. It's taken hold. You can see it up here in the statistics. Over time, the middle class has become a minority. Is the economy collapsing? That's a very, very real form of economic collapse, okay? And it's not something that we should ever see in a healthy economy, in a healthy society. What we should see is what people think intuitively, right? It's not rocket science, and it's not wrong to expect that the middle class grows over time. When we see the opposite situation, that once there was a healthy middle class, and over time it has declined and diminished to become a minority, that's an extremely bad sign. That is a sign that things are not working, okay, in a very basic way. So that's the first form of economic collapse. And like I said, it's extremely real. Okay, let's come to another form of economic collapse. And I'll throw up another chart for you here. This is a chart of what we call intergenerational mobility. This is a stunning chart. Okay, it shows us that every generation is doing worse than the last one. And it shows us that this has been going on for generation after generation. And now we're up to maybe 5, 6 generations. So, the boomers catch a lot of heat these days, but the truth is that this chart shows us that the boomers did worse than the silent generation. The late boomers did worse than the early boomers. Gen X did worse than the boomers. Late Gen X did worse than early Gen X. The millennials did worse than Gen X. And now we have Zoomers who are in really, really dire shape. This chart kind of stops at late Gen X. But if we continued it to account for millennials and Zoomers, the trend would, we would see the same trend accelerating and getting even more dire over time. Each generation doing worse than the one before it over very significant periods of time. So this too is a form of economic collapse, right? And you can see it very simply in this chart. And to me, it makes no sense to deny it. We'll come back to that. But think about what it means, again, for a society to be facing a situation where every generation is doing worse than the one before it. That's a very dire thing. It's a very alarming thing. And it's a very real form of economic collapse. Okay? Let's discuss another form of economic collapse too. Here, I'll throw it up for you in the chart. U.S. median income, about $30,000 a year. Okay? Now here, a quote. The average American worker needs about $85,000 after tax to live comfortably. Many Americans earn too little to attain a decent standard of living in their communities. It's again a very real form of economic collapse. Okay? When we have people who are earning the average, but the average is far too little to have a decent life, that too is a very significant form of economic collapse. Because again, we're talking about a very, very large scale effect, right? So those are just 3 examples, and I can give you many, many more. Now, the reason that I focused on this kind of dry stuff, guys, is that this discussion, right? And if you remember the Post article at the beginning, this discussion gets politicized, and politicizing things makes us stupider. It doesn't help us kind of understand the world very well. So these are facts, and the facts say to me almost incontrovertibly that we are experiencing economic collapse. Okay, it's not just America, it's around the world. If you think about how many recent destabilizing political movements have gained traction just in the last few weeks, a lot of those are driven by economic concerns, right, over collapse. So what happens here? Why is it that when you look at statistics, right, there's very good evidence of economic collapse, but yet it's become this kind of fake debate? Pundits and columnists and elites or whatever, establishment figures will say, no, economy's booming. Well, I'm going to explain that to you too. So imagine that there's a fictitious economy. This fictitious economy consists of a billionaire, okay, and 100 guys like you and me, just average people. The billionaire makes $200 that year, an extra $200. Each of us lose $1. There's 100 of us. That economy can be said to have grown on average by $100. So the billionaire has made 200, each of us have lost 1. There's 100 of us, that's 100, net gain 100. So when we average things out, we come to statistical illusions. Okay? And that's kind of what's happening in this debate, in this fake debate, in this, mess. Establishment types, pundits, columnists, people who are not very good at economics, are looking at short-run average figures. And short-run average figures paint a picture of an economy that's doing okay. But those are statistical illusions, like the one I just drew for you in my fictitious example. So if we have a situation where GDP is growing by 2-3%, but costs are growing by way more than that, and the average person can't make ends meet to begin with, then of course it's a statistical illusion. So that's one thing that the proponents that the economy is strong point to. GDP is growing. I explained to you how that's a statistical illusion. Let's take another example of a statistical illusion. Another thing that the proponents of a strong economy will point to is that jobs are being created en masse. But what do we know about today's jobs? Well, most of them pay the median income by definition, right? That's what the median income is. The median income, dismally low, 30K, not nearly enough to have a stable or comfortable life anywhere, almost, right? So that's why people have to go into debt and all this kind of thing. But so the point is, there's job creation, but it's very, very low quality job creation, and those jobs do not pay enough for people to have stable lives. So again, a statistical illusion. So when we look at short-run averages, we make poor conclusions. And a good economist, and what I'm trying to do is teach you how to think like a good economist, okay? And a good economist would never just look at short-run averages. What we want to know are long-term trends. So think about the 3 things that I showed you before, okay? That chart of downward mobility, of each generation doing worse than the last one before it. The middle class becoming a minority over decades. Okay, the fact that median incomes have not kept pace with the cost of living. Those 3 things are not short-run averages. They are very, very long-term trends, right? So the proponents of a strong economy will look at things like GDP or job growth this year. But what I'm trying to show you, and the ways in which the economy collapsing, are much broader. They're over decades. They apply across society. And so they're much less prone to that statistical illusion effect, if you see what I mean. If the proponents of a strong economy say, hey, GDP is booming and jobs are being created, what's the problem? Well, when you look at the data in deeper ways and you see that implosion in mobility, each generation doing worse than the last one, when you see the middle class becoming a minority over time, when you see incomes failing to keep pace with costs of living, those are much longer term trends, right? They're not just things that are like this day, this quarter, this month. And so the economy is collapsing in those ways. And when we talk about things like social collapse, we're not talking about crises or crashes, okay? These are different things. So one of the problems here is that the proponents of a strong economy, when people say the economy is collapsing, they look for signs of crashes or crises, which is what they know because they haven't been trained properly in economics. A crash and a crisis is not a collapse. These are very different things. Think about what a crash or a crisis is. Think about like a banking crisis or a financial crash. These are like daily events, right? One day the stock market is doing fine, tomorrow it's crashed. Banking crisis, okay, plays out over weeks or months maybe. Okay, so crashes and crises are, again, short-term things. And the proponents of a strong economy look for evidence of crashes or crises. And they say, hey, there's no banking crisis, there's no financial crisis, there's no short-run crisis or crash that I can see, everything's great. That's not what a collapse is. A collapse is not a crash or a crisis. A collapse is a much longer-term trend. It plays out over decades, over generations, in fact. And it's that long-run trend of downward motion, often accelerating. So if you remember this chart, that's exactly what it shows us. Or if we think about the middle class becoming a minority and shrinking, again, that's what it shows us. So collapse is not crash, it's not crisis. A collapse can be punctuated by a series of crashes or crises. Okay, but a collapse is a different and distinct dynamic phenomenon. It's much longer term. It applies across social groups, generations, young people, middle-aged people, households, genders, classes. It cuts across all these things. And that's exactly what we see. So when the proponents of a strong economy don't really understand any of this, it's because they haven't been versed in this logic very well. Okay, so one of the things I'm trying to teach you is to get beyond that. And I think most people have the feeling these days, right, that the economy is not doing well. And I think most people are baffled to constantly see this refrain from, I don't know, pundits or newspapers or, not very good economists that things are great out there. Things are not great out there. And statistics like these show it to us. But interpreting statistics like these is an art unto itself, right? And so what these statistics tell us is that sense of collapse is very real. Just because, the stock market hasn't melted down doesn't mean that the economy isn't collapsing. Stock market melting down is something that happens in a day. Economic collapse is something that happens over generations, half a century, 30, 50 years. And when we look at the economy that way, there are very clear, very dire, very advanced signs of collapse. Okay, and the biggest sign of collapse, frankly, between you and me guys, is when people turn to implosive politics. They turn to lunatics and crackpots and conspiracy theories. That too is a sure sign of economic collapse. It's an advanced sign of economic collapse because people don't do that kind of stuff in good times. Okay, so that's a lot. Take your time with it. Think it over. Is the economy collapsing? Yeah, it is. It's collapsing all around us. And it's only going to get worse unless we start talking about this stuff in much more serious and enlightened ways. Okay, so that's my message, I guess. Thanks for listening. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. I'll be back with you soon. Thank you.